How's it going, all you minties? Uncanny Omar here from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And today, welcome to part 2 of the Transformers reading order in collected editions. So, let's go ahead and roll out. Okay, we are finally here at part 2 of the Transformers reading order in collected editions. If you want the written documentation of all this, by the way, you can find that on our Patreon. It starts at $1 a month for that particular tier. So what we're looking at here is something that I debated whether to do or not to do, because there really is no chronological order to read these books. These happen to be the era of Transformer comics where there really wasn't a lot of comics coming out. And we had different companies come in and step up and say, hey, we'll take the license from Marvel. Because towards the end of the last video, you noticed that Marvel UK kept going, and then eventually that ended. But this video does start with some Marvel comics that we'll get to here in a little bit. But before we do, please don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. All that helps with our YouTube algorithm and our channel keep growing. So we do have a variety of different books we're going to be looking at from different publishers, and that was part of the reason why I was like, well, let's just go ahead and start talking about the IDW stuff. But so many of you on the Saturday live streams suggested that I just keep going with it and give you a history lesson like I did with part 1. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about some of these books, look at the artwork, and then talk about some of the behind-the-scenes stories that make these particularly interesting. So we're starting today with Transformers Generation 2. This is not your father's Autobot. So today we are kicking it off with Transformers Dark Designs. Now this was available from Titan Comics. It was published overseas, but then of course Diamond Comics started putting their stuff and distributing Titan Comics over here, so this was easily accessible for some people here living in the United States, also available in a standard-sized hardcover comic. So what exactly is this? What the heck is Megatron doing wearing camo? I'm sure you've seen the toy, but for those of you not familiar, this is Generation 2. So after the cancellation of Transformers in 1991, the UK comics kept going. Like the UK, they kept writing a few more stories past where the story ended here in America, and then eventually that was canceled. So then came Generation 2, just a couple of years later. So I always found this particularly funny. This is not your father's Autobot. I think it should have been your big brother's Autobot, because I mean, it was only just a couple of years since the previous stories were, or the previous line was canceled. So look how awesome this is, though. I love this cover. I love the edginess to the bullets on the side of Optimus' head. And then, of course, the smoking gun right there. And then the cover is a die-cut cover that unveils this image. And Simon Furman was kind enough to sign this. I've always been a fan of this particular cover. I thought it was such a cool, gimmicky cover. Who knows? Maybe one day... Who knows? Maybe one day, whoever ends up with a license will give us some kind of reprint of this stuff with a cover like this in chromium. Alright, but that stuff was collected in a series of 2 trade paperbacks, because Marvel decided to cash in on the idea of Generation 2, which was pretty much the toys coming back to stores. The cartoon coming back to television with horrible editing, and oh my gosh, just these early use of CG to do some of the swipes. Oh, it was awful. So that's what this is. This begins the Generation 2. So let's go back to the beginning here, where there's an introduction by Simon Furman. Now, I will say something right now, and that is, do not read this comic if you haven't read the G.I. Joe Transformers that were collected in the previous IDW collections, because that's where Megatron ends up getting rebuilt. That's why he looks like a tank through these particular issues. That's why that Generation 2 Megatron looks like a huge tank. And that's why you're going to see characters like Sideswipe look like his Generation 2 toy. So some of the colors will end up changing. So this is a follow-up to that G.I. Joe Transformers book. The Autobots pretty much entered a conflict between 2 separate factions of the Decepticons, because we are introduced early on to this character named G-Axis. And G-Axis will play a big role here. He's kind of like the new bad guy, this guy right here. And there's a little bit of behind the scenes story with that because, and yes, you are going to see some G.I. Joe characters appear through Generation 2 because, like I said, they played an important part in Megatron's, or really in remodeling Megatron here. And I always enjoyed that. So Simon Furman is still writing these stories. And he was pretty much told by Marvel, okay, we're going to give you 12 issues and we'll see how the sales do. You know, we'll see if there's interest in Transformers again. So the character of G-Axis, spelled with a Jiaxus, by the way, is a play on the word G, ax us. Like, he knew we were going to get canceled, so he created this character to kind of mock the people that were like, yeah, go ahead and write 12 issues and then we'll go back and revisit. So Derek Yaniger is the artist throughout most of these particular issues here. This one here collects the first 6 issues, and really, man, like both G-Axis and Megatron go on huge killing sprees. Bludgeon makes a return here. Ends up getting repaired, and it's interesting to see some returning characters from the previous run, though. Of course, there's humans whenever you have G.I. Joe involved. But like I mentioned, the series went on for 12 issues. So that's what Rage in Heaven is. And I find it funny that they decided to use Optimus for that cover. So Rage in Heaven is volume 2 of Generation 2. This collects the last 6 issues in here. And this is pretty much after the big defeat of the Autobots. They end up stealing the Matrix. There's a really cool story in here that I don't want to give away that features a ghost of a certain character. If you're familiar with Transformers lore, you probably know who I'm talking about. For some reason, Megatron ends up having teeth during this particular run. Like I said, Derek Yaniger supplying most of the artwork again. Simon Furman finishing out his 12 issues. And here we find out that G-Axis is not working alone, that he could be working under somebody, because he was sent a long time ago to go and colonize a bunch of planets to make a Cybertronian empire. So now this is his return, and he's wondering how Megatron could have been defeated by the Autobots. So there is a darker force at play, and in the end, you know, it's not like they ever use the character again, but it's this guy right here, Liege Maximo. Look how badass that name alone is so cool. But that's what ends up finishing the series of Generation 2. The series was canceled. They did wrap up a lot of the loose ends, but Simon Furman just loves to push the idea that the Matrix can fix anything, and boy, anybody can die during these particular issues he's writing. But that ends the run again for Marvel Comics and Transformers. So this series went all the way into 1994 before getting canceled. So we don't see Transformers for a while, but we are starting to get some things here in America finally. Actually, before I talk about those, I did want to talk about this really quick. This is Welcome to the World of Transformers. This was a book that was released in Japan only, and then I believe eventually somebody decided to do some translations online, but this goes through the shows. But the reason that I wanted to get this is because there were so many Japanese exclusive toys and pretty much characters that I had never seen before, so that's why I wanted to get this book. Oh my gosh, I don't know when I ended up buying this. It has to be at least 20 years old, but it showcases a lot of the art from characters that never made it over to the stateside, and that's something to keep in mind. There were only 3 seasons of Transformers. We didn't get Headmasters, we didn't get Master Force, we didn't get Victory Series, we didn't get Scramble City. That stuff didn't come until much later. I mean, towards the tail end of the DVD era. I mean, yeah, we could buy bootleg copies from I believe it was New Zealand translations, but oh my gosh, they were like scrambled up VHS copies. Oh, they were absolutely horrible. And to get Japanese copies with English or English subtitles, that was even harder to find. So it's so weird to go back and think about those days, and now where we are, where we actually know, because of a lot of the comics too, the characters of Star Saber, Leo Kaiser, or Death Star, as you know, that they've almost become as popular as characters like Optimus Prime or Rodimus Prime. So what I wanted to go to though was the manga that came out in Japan. This was released here in America finally after hearing about it for years. And 3 years ago is when Viz decided to bring these over. So you could see the characters on the cover there of Overlord and Death Saurus, Star Saber. So some characters that had never made it over to the stateside cartoons. Again, this is because we didn't get that stuff. It ended with season 3 and that was it. And we got a movie. All right, but the interesting thing about Transformers, by the way, this reads in the traditional manga from right to left, is this is the stuff that was coming out in Japan as the show was coming out. But they have a series, or season 3, as is known here, in Japan was known as 2010. They didn't get the movie until much later. So a lot of the characters that appeared here appeared in the animated season 3. So it would be a bit like watching season 3 going into season 3 without having watched the movie, so you don't know the origin of Megatron going and transforming into Galvatron, or getting reimagined as Galvatron, or Hot Rod becoming the new leader, Rodimus Prime. So I thought that was really interesting. That didn't air until much later, I think on VHS. So this is pretty much the Transformers heading over to Japan, teaming up with this kid named Kenji. A lot of them have their toy versions of themselves, the way they look. And like I mentioned, this coincides with the cartoon release over there. Even so much so as marketing helmets that you could wear to call the Autobots for help that kids could buy at the store. So it's silly things like that that were introduced through here. That's the first part of this particular book, and then we get season 3, and then we get newer characters that appear through here, like Gilthor, who's kind of like a mix of Megatron and Optimus Prime, who's actually a pretty badass looking robot. We get some season 3 stuff, and what my favorite thing about the manga is the illustrated work that came out during the magazine era. So the magazines were coming out where the comic books were collected, and this is where kids get to learn about the characters. As a matter of fact, some of these pictures back here are the first time that they find out that, oh, Megatron turned into Galvatron because of Unicron. So this came out in the TV magazine, April 87. Galvatron's true form is actually Megatron. This illustration accompanied the article that fully revealed for the first time the connection between Megatron and Galvatron in Japan. So that's because the movie didn't air until later. So there's all kinds of things that are back here, all kinds of illustrations that have never made it to the stateside until the manga came out. So that's volume 1. Then we move on to volume 2. This is pretty much the Headmasters and Master Force. As a matter of fact, the Headmasters is a pretty good adaptation of the anime. Like, characters are different than the the fourth season, the Headmaster season here, which only lasted just a few episodes. There's really no humans or Nebulons that transform into the heads of the Cybertrons, or actually, that's another thing I forgot to mention. They're not called Destrons and Cybertrons. They're actually called Autobots and Decepticons in this translation. Because in Japan, that's what they were known as. The Decepticons were the Destrons, and the Autobots were the Cybertrons. But for this translation, I guess to make it easier for people to read, they are known as Decepticons and Autobots. So here they team up with human kids, and some of them become headmasters. This is really interesting story here about a kid that refuses to get out of a wheelchair until he teams up with Highbrow. And they take a lot of liberties with Master Force, though. So, all set in 2025, and we have some returning characters from the past. Not just the ones you see there, but there are others. And God Ginrai, actually there's an interesting origin of that. Because in the manga, according to this manga, God Ginrai looks like Optimus Prime, but isn't Optimus Prime, and it's because of his fighting spirit that makes him look like that. It's because of his bravery, and he shows aspects of a Prime, and that's why he looks like that. There's illustrations in the back that showcases Headmasters and Master Force characters. A lot of really cool illustrations that, again, for the first time, came here. Now, the one I was really excited to read about, because I've heard about this character and I've seen him in pictures, not just online, but in that one book I showed you earlier, is Volume 3. Because in Volume 3, we have Victory, and we have the Zone, and we have something called Battle Stars. So Battle Stars is where you're going to see this character. I've always wanted to know about this character, and that is Super Megatron. And I was going to be so disappointed if Super Megatron did not play a role in this. But first, Victory is in here, an adaptation of Victory with Death Saurus and Star Saber. Other characters from that particular series make an appearance. Again, they take some liberties with the adaptation of Victory. You have an adaptation of the Zone here, which has the little Micromasters. And then finally, the Battle Stars, which shows us Super Megatron. Short and sweet, but I finally get to read about it. It's so ridiculous in their Star Convoy. But I've always been interested in that character since I first saw pictures of him. And I cannot remember. It was somewhere between the cancellation of the original TV show and then the beginning of the relaunch of Transformers, which really happened toward the late 90s with Car Robots and eventually Armada and all those. So it was before the age of the internet. Maybe I saw it at a convention and I was like, what? Who is that? Then there's illustrations in the back of not just Super Megatron, but also Star Convoy in full detail, which is so freaking badass. So that's what the manga provides. You know, they're smaller scale books. They read from right to left, but they bring in so many interesting concepts and original characters that we hadn't seen in America. Now, of course, later on, IDW especially, use some of those characters for their ongoing comics. Enter Dreamwave Studios. So this is going to be the story of Dreamwave Studios, Pat Lee and his brother, forming the studios and putting Transformers out there, back on the map. So the year's 2001, and Wizard Magazine was huge at the time, and they ran an article about resurging like a bunch of old cartoons and having new artists doing them. Pretty much a interpretation of those characters. And Pat Lee did this amazing picture that pretty much got everybody hyped up. Now keep in mind, this is 2001, so the internet's still kind of young. I know it's crazy to think that, but it was. And then the license came up. So this is 2001, about 10 years after the cancellation of Transformers from Marvel Comics, and then about 8 years after the cancellation of Generation 2. Yeah, that's 7 years, really. But the license came up, and it was neck and neck between people that were interested in the license of Transformers for comic books. One of them was Marvel Comics. And then they made a statement that, no, we're going to pass on it. It just got to be too much. And Pat Lee made a statement that he would not draw Transformers comics for another company. He would only draw it if he got the license. So him and his brother made Dreamwave Studios, based out of Canada, and they got a bunch of other artists and talent to come in and help them. So they were making comics at the time. They were just a studio, but then they decided to become a publishing company. They were making comics at the time for Image Comics, like Warlands, and what was the other one? Crime Minds, I think. It was like the Ghost in the Shell. So they were known for their anime look to the comic books. And anime was huge at the time, because that was like late 90s and early aughts. The big anime boom was happening because of Toonami, because of Tokyo Pop. And eventually, in 2002, I think it was March or April 2002, we got Transformers Generation 1. So the story here is actually written by Chris Saraceni, and Pat Lee did the pencils, and Rob Armstrong and Eric Sander doing the inks. The colors are what blew everybody away. The colors were what made people fans of the Dreamwave comics. The colors are what a lot of us thought, this is exactly what I wanted out of a Transformer comics. It's been 10 years since Transformer comics have been out, and I felt like now we got it right. Now, the story itself, it's okay. I mean, we're talking about the early years of Dreamwave, and a lot of these people were new to storytelling, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter when we got images like this. We were just blown away. And it was basically due to the colors. So, in Generation 1, it tells the story several years after pretty much the destruction of the second arc, when the Transformers, or rather the Autobots, try to return back to Cybertron. The arc gets destroyed, so a lot of our favorite robots, we thought are dead. Now, this has nothing to do with the Marvel comics. This is not a continuation, just like the manga. This is its own adaptation. It's a fresh new start. So we meet the character of General, what was his name? Halo, I think. And he ends up recruiting Spike. That's right, Spike gets to come back, Spike Witwicky. And they pretty much go and try to get some of these Transformers back because Megatron and his forces are coming back. So, I mean, just look at those colors. Like, to be there in 2001, this was unprecedented. Now, just like Simon Furman does, they take a lot of these characters and then they end up ripping our hearts out by killing some of these characters. So this was a mini-series, and it sold so well. I mean, it was a huge seller. I remember when this came out, comic book stores had both covers of issue number 1 and it was the Decepticon cover, and Autobot cover and Decepticon cover for issue number 1. They were buying posters. The license gave them the rights to do box art for a lot of the toys that were coming back on the shelves, like the Armada toys, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And it was just insane. It was such a great time to be a Transformers fan. Again, the stories were okay. What we didn't know was there's a lot of weird, dramatic things happening at Dreamwave Studios. So let's talk about that as we look at the next trade. The only other trade of the Transformers Generation 1 comics. So what we didn't know is by the end of the first year of 2002, Pat Lee and his brother ended up buying like luxury vehicles with a lot of the Dreamwave studio money, and they weren't paying licenses to put the books overseas. So Brad Mick is now the writer, but I think that's just a name that he was using. I don't think that was his real name, and then Pat Lee being the artist. And there is a layout assist here that you'll notice, which we will talk a little bit about that later on, and an introduction or a forward by Simon Furman. Because it wasn't all bad, right? I mean, but we do have to talk about the controversial aspects of Dreamwave. So yes, in 2002, even though the comics were selling, for some reason they didn't acquire the license to sell the products of Transformers overseas. They didn't pay for it. Eventually they did, and then they were able to. Then in 2003, there was rumblings within the comic book industry, the people working at Dreamwave, saying they weren't getting paid or they weren't getting proper credit. Like the layout artist actually drawing the pages, but for some reason not getting any credit. Pat Lee was getting all the credit. And keep in mind, Pat Lee was driving around a luxury vehicle while some of his artists and writers were not getting paid. So unfortunately, just like these things happen, it kind of blew up. And I mean, that was year 2. That was 2003. And then by year 3 in 2004, they ended up losing the license because what they did, and you can look this up, you can see some of these writers and artists, of course, have gone on record with interviews. They didn't pay the artists and writers in the end. What they did was make a new company. I think they called it Dream Engine. And they filed bankruptcy with about $1 million in debt towards writers and artists and colorists. Pretty much people that worked on the books, so they stopped working on books. So a lot of these lines were just canceled. A lot of this stuff that happened, a lot of the drama that happened, we didn't know about as comic book fans, right? Like I said, the age of the internet was still kind of new. In forums, people were talking about things, but you didn't want to believe it because it's just rumors right now. What you wanted to see was another comic book, and they were doing well. They were bragging about getting the rights to Capcom comics. They had Mega Man. They had posters for Devil May Cry, and they were like, soon we were going to be releasing all these new lines of products, and they never delivered. We were riding on the hope of just the insanity of the hype train. None of it was real. The behind the scenes was so heartbreaking that we had no idea. We just kept seeing pictures of ads of all these upcoming books. And we were like, oh my gosh, they got Devil May Cry, they got Darkstalkers, they got Mega Man coming out. We had no idea that they were just advertising that stuff without actually paying the proper license for it or anything like that. So I do have to talk a little bit about the story. This story is the ongoing series, and it pretty much just follows the classic format. You have Megatron being ejected into space, Starscream betraying people, But here you start seeing the appearances of Season 3 characters like Cup and characters like Hot Rod. And that's pretty much it. That's all we ended up getting, and people love using Shockwave. Now, I said it wasn't all bad, because there was a lot of good that came out of Dreamwave. So let's talk about the other series that they did. So like I said, there were only 2 trades of this. There was a series, or a trade of Volume 3 that was coming out, and unfortunately that never came out. So it was just these 2, but we also got War Within. Now, this is the IDW Omnibus, but this is the stuff that was published over at Dreamwave. And what they did was bring back Simon Furman as the writer. So this all takes place in the past. This is Megatron and Optimus Prime pretty much clashing with each other for the first time. Optimus is not called Optimus Prime. He's known as Optronics, who will later become Optimus Prime. So they went a different route, or Simon Furman did, than that of Orion Pax. Now, what's collected in here is also the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages introduces us to a character that was used to this day, even in the movies, and that is the Fallen. Yes, I'm talking about the Bayformer movies. But the Fallen appears through the Dark Ages. Again, all this taking place years before the Transformers crash landed on Earth in 1984. The other thing that Dreamwave did right, let me get back to this right here, is introduce us to a new artist right here. An artist that was drawing Transformer comics, or I think he was doing comics. He was doing a lot of pretty much fan art is what we called it. And that is Don Figueroa. Now, Don would eventually start working for IDW. He was kind of the big name when drawing the books at IDW. But he had that, I like to call it a Dreamwave art style, which is kind of what Dreamwave wanted out of all their artists. And he started mixing in his own art. We did get, for the Dark Ages, we did get Andrew Wildman back. And Andrew Wildman, yes, this art back here, believe it or not, is Andrew Wildman from the first part of Transformers that you saw. Had to change his style because Pat Lee insisted that all his artists that draw for Dreamwave draw the same kind of way, letting the colors pretty much dominate over the art. Covers are all the way back here in the back. There were a lot of toys that were based on the War Within. Like I said, not all things bad happen at Dreamwave. They did some good. Armada. So this is another book that was written by Chris Saraceni, and then eventually Simon Furman taking over the book. This collects issues 0 through 18, and it is a loose adaptation of the Armada cartoon. So in here, you're not going to see the conflict of Starscream, because I know a lot of people really love the Armada Starscream and his whole inner conflict. You are going to see some of the humans appear through here, but it mainly focuses on the conflict between the Decepticons and the Autobots, and them capturing the Minicons. But the Minicons are different here because they can actually talk instead of making, those little blip, blip, bloop, bloop sounds like from the cartoon. But that's what this is. This is an adaptation, but a loose adaptation of that. There are characters that appear through here that hadn't appeared before. And here, we kind of get the idea that Unicron is a character that can... That is the same in every universe, is what Simon Furman tried to establish. Now, there is another artist that joins Simon Furman towards the second arc, and that is Guido Guidi, who has also become a fan favorite, and Dreamwave introduced him to the Transformers comics fans. So, not everything bad. I will tell you my favorite thing out of the Dreamwave era, though, are these 2 books. The Transformers More Than Meets the Eyes, the official guidebook. These are based on those Marvel handbooks that were reprinted with the original, well, I guess the IDW reprints. But this was an updated look to them. So these were so popular that IDW reprinted these with their own brand later on. So let me just show you what they look like. So these are done in alphabetical order, starting with the Aerialbots to, well, this one here, in particular. This one goes from Aerialbots to the Pretender monsters. And the Aerialbots are, of course, a team, so you kick it off. Those are some of the covers, by the way. Right here with Air Raid and Fireflight. So you get a bio on the characters, you get their weapons and abilities, and you get their transforming mode, their alternate mode. And if they have more than one, it's all down here. But again, with updated artwork and those colors that, I don't know about you all that were reading the Dreamwave era, I love these colors. I thought this was the perfect interpretation of the characters. And a lot of artwork in here by not just Don Figueroa or Guido Guidi, but Alex Milne, also one of the artists that was introduced to a lot of us fans through the Dreamwave era. And then eventually those guys would go on and blow up all over the IDW era. So let's look at Volume 2. This goes from the Protectobots to Wreck-Gar. It's James McDonough and Adam Paddocks are the two writers behind this. And the pencils are all over here. So, unfortunately, some of the people that drew this also didn't get credit again. Just one of the shady things that happen over at Dreamwave that we weren't aware of. But these are based on both the toys, and sometimes you can see, or a lot of the times, now the designs here are mostly based on the animated series. Some of these, though, go back to, like, their toy designs. So, for example, let me show you Ultra Magnus. They decided to use the Ultra Magnus from the toy design instead of what we've known Ultra Magnus from the cartoon. So that's why Ultra Magnus looks like this. His actual trailer combines with Optimus. This is really cool. That's what I did dig about the IDW era. But sadly, I mean, there wasn't a lot of IDW in collected editions. There was a project that they did that was canceled that IDW ended up printing, and that is Beast Wars. I'm not gonna roar. So Beast Wars is all collected in this omnibus, and the omnis that I was showing are your soft cover omnis. They're like digest size, but it was everything all in one. But my buddy Newspooey Channel actually sent me volumes 1 and 2, so I could have them in full. Oh man, and their side, so I can have them in full comic book size art. Now, this is different than like the CG cartoon, the CG show, because this is a retelling of the Beast Wars characters that did not appear in the show. So if you're looking for the actual show adaptation, you're not going to find that here. You're going to find a lot of the toys that came out, not just here, but in Japan. And of course, a lot of the characters that showed up in Beast Wars 2 in Japan, the cartoon, or Beast Wars Neo, they make appearances here. And the source book is found in the Omnibus. That's the only place to find it, because it's not collected in the trade paperbacks. The trade paperbacks are mainly the stories. And this kick-ass artwork you're seeing through these pages here is not only supplied by Don Figueroa, but also Guido Guidi. And there was a Beast Wars series that IDW was publishing towards the end of the licensing, but my trade paperback of that is not out yet. But it is out, and it also doesn't fall into the continuity of Transformers reading orders, so it can be read just like any of these books. So this kind of wraps up the era of the Transformers at Dreamwave, or that particular universe, because War Within all is supposed to be the beginning. Armada is like another universe of the Transformers Generation 1. But there was another thing that they promised us, and that was a crossover with G.I. Joe. However, that crossover never came out, but the ideas of that crossover were put into the Devil's Dupe Omnibus. Now, this was originally released as 4 books, and this finally came out in an omnibus format. A lot of these books, unfortunately, are out of print. Who knows, maybe one day when the license holder is revealed, because I can't believe as of this video we still don't know who the license holder is, although a lot of us have plenty of ideas, they'll reprint some of these stories. So this is written by Tim Seeley, it's written by Josh Blaylock, and it's written by Dan Jolly. Artwork in here by the phenomenal E.J. Sue, who will blow up during the IDW era. Mike Miller doing some of the artwork, Alex Milne doing some of the artwork in here, and Andrew Wildman coming back. Another interpretation of the Transformers versus G.I. Joe is exactly what this is. And let me tell you something right now. Characters get killed off left and right. If you're a robot, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're popular or not. You're going to get killed. So pretty much Cobra ends up finding the Ark that contains the Decepticons and Autobots been buried under the earth for the last 5 million years. So luckily, a few of the Autobots were not discovered. And now they team up with the Joes to stop Cobra and the Decepticons, or using the Decepticons as weapon. So that's what this particular series is. And man, there's so many splash pages through here. And the art, like I said, there's a different artist in here. So the art ranges from what you saw during the Dreamwave era to traditional comic book art. And then you get classic artists back like Andrew Wildman. So you're going to see characters in here from the movies. You're going to see characters in here from seasons 1, 2, and 3. And like I said, nobody is safe. This was published also in 4 trade paperbacks, or you can try to find this out of print, hardcover. This was actually gifted to me by my buddy Kyle, who sent me this as a huge surprise gift. Because, yeah, this was impossible to find. And, man, my dude just... I have no idea where he ended up finding it. All I know is that, thank you so much. So, this, again, was published by Devil's Due Publishing, and it was the idea that started at Dreamwave. Now, it's not the only G.I. Joe Transformers, or Transformers versus G.I. Joe, because we've seen that in the pages of Marvel Comics, and you'll see it again in the pages of IDW. But, there's a really cool book, again, taken out of continuity, Transformers vs. G.I. Joe. Now, this has also been available in trade paperbacks, but this is the Quintessential collection, the hardcover, collecting all 13 issues. John Barber is the writer on this. Tom Scioli is the artist with his very Jack Kirby art style. I think that is his signature right there, because I got this through IDW Cell. Art, colors, and lettering by Tom Scioli. Oh, he's also the co-writer on this. So this goes back to the classic look. Like, we're talking like early Marvel's classic look, which is really weird to have it printed on this glossy paper. But this is the type of artwork you're going to be seeing through here. You're either going to love this or you're going to hate it. I mean, I can see, because some of my viewers cannot stand artwork like this. I happen to be a big fan of stuff like this because it stands out. It's not your typical Dreamwave art. I still think the Dreamwave look that eventually evolved into the IDW look is my favorite. But this is also going back to memories. I love this type of stuff. Yes, this is another one that characters end up dying left and right. And it really feels like both John Barber and Tom were playing with toys in their backyard, and they were like, we're going to write a story one day. And it's ridiculous, but then there's some things in here that are almost like a social commentary. So this whole thing takes place on Earth, and then they move to Cybertron as the G.I. Joes and the Autobots fight Cobra and the Decepticons from not just taking over Earth, but taking over the universe. It goes into some dark territory. There's some violence in here. There's lots of blood. Again, characters from seasons 1, 2, and 3 of Transformers, but also characters from seasons 1, 2, and post-movie of G.I. Joe. But this is what the artwork looks like. It's got that old school feel to it. And all of the covers are in the back. Now, my buddy Jeff Hartz gifted me this Transformers Vault book. It comes in a slipcase. And this was published by Abrams Books. It's just a history of the Transformers. Going from the toys to the comics. The infrared stuff, so you can see the bios are all in there. This is a really cool book. It's not part of any of the comic book history or chronological order, but I wanted to add it in here because it goes into the era of Transformers no matter who the publisher was. And I thought that was a cool take, that we're not just talking about the toys, but we're all actually talking about the movies and the comic books, which is what this is about. So thank you so much to my buddy Jeff for sending me this. It comes in a slipcase like this. Now, a lot of us are fans of the Transformers movie. Think the movie is what a lot of people remember. A lot of the lines, two all are one, one shall stand, one shall fall. So I'm not sure why a lot of the publishers didn't do an adaptation of the movie. You had the Marvel adaptation, and then you had the IDW adaptation. This stupid book right here, for some reason, was never collected in a bigger format, which I wish it could have been, because the artwork in here is by Don Figueroa. The writing in here is going back to Bob Budiansky, and Josh Burcham is doing the colors. And it is an exact adaptation of the movie. It's done in the small digest size. And I mean, if you're a fan of the movie, you've got these lines memorized, you've got these particular scenes memorized. They added a couple of little things here and there, like the Combiners fighting during the siege of Autobot City, which was not shown in the movie. And, you know, but for the most part, this stayed true to the movie. And man, this was such a cool adaptation. All the way in the back is this era of IDW that's the spotlight of Hot Rod, that I'll talk about when I talk about the Reading Order Part 3. But this is a small digest size trade paperback. I ended up finding it at a Half Price Books many years ago, and it was just hiding in my shelf. I forgot about it until I started doing this reading order. All right, there have been many crossovers with G.I. Joe, but Transformers has crossed over with other properties, especially with IDW. When I talk about Part 3, I'll talk about the Revolution story, so I'll leave that for that. But during the IDW era, there was also the My Little Pony. There was a couple of these released. There's also the Transformers and Ghostbusters crossover. And there's the Transformers and Back to the Future crossover that nobody saw coming. So it has crossed over with other properties, other Hasbro properties, completely taken out of continuity. Well, I guess maybe, because there could be a multiverse out there for Transformers. And that's the other thing I'm going to talk about today. So Marvel had the license from 1984 all the way to 1994, probably a little bit longer. And then there was no Transformers comics because the license just expired. And then in 2002 to 2004, it was Dreamwave. Now, there were other things in there, like 3H Enterprises released some comics, feature mainly the Beast Wars characters. There were also like the magazines or the fan magazines that came with a subscription that had comics, but that stuff's never been collected in collected editions. And then in 2005, October of 2005, IDW got the license to Transformers. I'll be talking more about that in my part 3. But there was another series I wanted to talk about. And that was published by IDW. And it is pretty much what would happen if Transformers had not been canceled with issue number 80. And it had kept going. And Simon Furman and Andrew Wildman and Stephen Baskerville had come back and kept working on the comic. So that's what Regeneration is. So Regeneration was a series of comics that pretty much visited that idea. They invited Simon Furman back, and they pretty much said, okay, no Generation 2, no UK continuity, no Dreamwave, no IDW. Let's just do our own continuity. Now, I was lucky enough to find this particular collection on eBay. This is a custom book. These are available in a series of 4 trade paperbacks, but really 5 because of Transformers 84. So the first trade paperback of Regeneration collects issues 80.5 and 81 to 85. 80.5 was the Free Comic Book Day reintroduction to the characters that appeared through the comic books. So Simon Furman, along with Andrew Wildman and Stephen Baskerville, came back to do a 80.5 and then an 81. So that's what Regeneration is. It's finishing out the original Transformers era that ended back in 1991. skipping all the things that happen in Generation 2 and the Marvel UK books and Dreamwave and pretty much anything that happened before this. So this story takes place in the year 2012, which is when the series kicked off. And you'll see a lot of familiar characters appear through here. Uh, Mainly characters like Optimus Prime, Hot Rod, and Cup, Springer, Ultra Magnus. But then, of course, the baddies are in here, like Megatron, Soundwave, Starscream, and Bludgeon. And then we see this guy right here, Circuit Smasher. Remember how I said in my part 1 that Simon Furman loved the character of Circuit Breaker, but because of licensing, he couldn't use her. So he wanted to make this Neo squad over at Marvel UK that featured her and a bunch of characters, changing her origin up. But again, licensing got in the way. So he started using Spike Witwicky as this character named Circuit Smasher. So he kind of takes the role of Circuit Breaker. So that's volume 1. And then we get volume 2, which we got the Nucleon plot that was introduced through the first story arc, and then this second story arc, we get pretty much that plot finished out. We get the return of Scorponok. This is where Grimlock kind of steps up, and he's the old school Grimlock that Simon Furman loved to write. You see the return of Shockwave and Starscream in here, and Galvatron, and it's just really cool because it's Andrew Wildman with this classic art style, not the Dreamwave art style, coming in and drawing these Transformers as if he's never left the book. And it's one of those things, can you ever truly go back home, though? All right, then we get the Regeneration 1 Volume 3, and this is pretty much Hot Rod becoming Rodimus Prime. Bludgeon comes back and he has a team up with Galvatron, and here Simon Furman is pushing the idea of a multiverse of Transformers. That's what I was talking about. Well, maybe the Friendship is Magic could exist out there, because we start seeing hints of it that kind of lead into issue 100. And we see like this right here, for example, we see animated Hot Rod, we see Hot Shot from Armada, we see just a bunch of characters that have appeared through comics and animated shows. And then, of course, the IDW version of Hot Rod. So it's really cool, that idea. Because, I mean, if it happens in Spider-Man and can happen on Crisis on Infinite Earths and can happen just every other comic property, why not Transformers? Fanboys would love it. Yes, and it is also the return of Ultra Magnus. Ultra Magnus actually has a really cool role to play in this, especially his fight with Galvatron in the 4th volume. So let's talk about that. So with volume 4, everything pretty much comes to an end. All the loose ends are wrapped up from the original Marvel Comics and the new introduction here in the Regeneration. You'll see returning characters like G-Axis, for example, comes back. Now, during this particular issues in here is when you do have a couple of fill-in artists like Jeff Sr., who actually worked with Simon Furman in the past, and then Guido Guidi, who has a rather unique style to his artwork. But this right here showcases the final battle, the war that will end all wars, with issue number 100. You can find out by yourself how that ends, and this, like I said, will be found in volume 4. But we do get one more thing in this particular collection that was collected in trade paperback, and that is Transformers 84. Now, this is all drawn by Guido Guidi using this really old school, classic, nostalgic style instead of that style that probably a lot of people were familiar with him. I think he was just having fun with this. This right here is issue number 0. And this is Secrets and Lies. I was on board with this one. Now, issue 100 wrapped up that Marvel era, but this right here is Transformers 84. This can be found in trade paperback too. This takes place during the year 1984, or that era of Transformers from 84, but it tells the story in a very unique way, because this tells it from the point of view of Punch and Counterpunch. He's that toy that really didn't show up in Marvel UK nor in the Marvel Comics, that was both Decepticon, here let me show you, Decepticon, but can transform to become a spy into an Autobot named Punch. So Counterpunch turns into Punch, and the narrative is told through his perspective, so you get to see both the point of view of the Decepticons and the point of view of the Autobots. So this was a cool series. I wish they had done more, but sadly that license is over, which I'll get more into with my part 3 of the Transformers reading order. I just didn't want anybody to miss these 5 books because I think they're such a cool follow-up, especially if you were a fan, hey, Straxus, of the original comic, of the Marvel comic. I think these add a nice companion piece to that. You'll see a lot of characters through the from the Japanese series through here that never made it to the stateside that I'm sure Simon Furman wanted to write. And in the back of each of the trades are writer commentaries that this custom has all the way in the back together, and then the variant covers. But that's it for Transformers Part 2. And I hope I was able to entertain you enough with some of the history behind the scenes to these books. Oh, that's such a cool homage cover there by Guidi. But that, as they say, is that. Oh, please somebody print this in a big format one day. Now, if you're interested in purchasing some of these books, and hopefully whenever they're reprinted sometime later, check out our sponsors.
If you're in Europe and you're interested in buying these books, definitely check out Walt's Comic Shop in Berlin, Germany. They have the cheapest pre-order prices, flat shipping rate of €12 for all EU countries, emails answered within 24 hours, waltzcomicshop.com, and you can use the code nearmintcondition at checkout and get free shipping for all EU countries with your first order over €40. That's Walt's Comic Shop, your reliable source for omnis and premium collected editions in Europe. Ding!
CheapGraphicNovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget, the CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And that was part 2 of the Transformers reading order in collected editions. Let me know in the comments down below what you would love to see collected, what you would love to see reprinted, what you would have added to this particular list. And yeah, this is one that I debated about, but in the end, I think we had some fun, or at least I did, reminiscing about the past. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. Don't forget to smash that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. Part 3 will be coming sometime soon. Hopefully it won't take as many months as this one did, because it is the IDW era, and it is my favorite era of Transformers. But that's it, everyone. Make sure to check out our spread shop. In the description of the video is where we have the link that has our logo on t-shirts, our logo on cups, hats, or just our different shirt designs. And check out our Patreon. It's a wonderful way to support the channel if you can do so. Videos like this are brought to you by the wonderful folks on our Patreon. But let's go ahead and end this with Till All Are One.